Namaskar and welcome to yet another episode of Around the World with me, Pankaj Saran. I'm happy to be joined again by Atir Khan, Tripti Nath and Asha Khosa. Thank you, listeners, for being with us and joining our show. Our objective is to bring you analysis of global issues that is simple, independent, objective, but yet has an authentic Indian perspective. Today, we will discuss the conflict in Ukraine, the role of Russia, and what it means for the world and, of course, for India. As you know, a few days ago, the President of Russia delivered a major speech in which he made several announcements. What do these announcements mean? How does the future look? Which way is this conflict heading? Can it be stopped from escalating? Where does India stand on this conflict? To discuss and answer these and so many other questions, let us start our discussion without any further ado. So please join us and I hope you enjoy this discussion. Thank you.
Ambassador Saran, Putin has announced mobilization and he's also carrying out referendum in Donbas and other places. Do you see a connect between the two and what does this mean for the conflict?
Yeah, thank you, Atir. I think before we discuss this particular announcement, we have to get back into the conflict's history a little bit. It began on the 24th of February, where the Russian forces entered Ukraine, and it's been so many months since then. I think this announcement of mobilization is linked very closely to the decision to have this referendum, because the results of the referendum will be out in a few days. And it's quite clear that they will all choose to become part of Russia. So he fears that if this happens, the Ukrainian side, with the help of Western weapons and assets, might try to attack those parts of the Donbas which are now going to become part of Russia. So he wants to have enough manpower to defend such attacks. So basically, I think we are going to see escalation of the current conflict, which, in my opinion, is very unfortunate.
But sorry. I wanted to ask you this: mobilization is a military term. What does it mean for Russia when he talks about mobilization? Is it the full-scale, army, or recruiting people from within? Because there's a lot of talk that people are being asked to, forcibly they've been asked to join the army. And move in that direction.
Yeah, so they've officially announced that the mobilization will be of 300,000 reservists. So these are people who've actually had some military training in the past. And they've also issued some clarification that they will not include people, say, working in the IT sector or another banking sector, etc. So these are people who are going to be called up. Their actual deployment is going to be different from mobilization. So, Russia has this huge military tradition starting from World War II, where they lost millions and millions of young men and women in battle. So this is part of that tradition of getting people back into military service. They've also announced in the decree that they've issued the terms and conditions in terms of the duration of the mobilization, the salaries, etc., etc. So this is basically the way it is. How they will actually be deployed on the battlefield, I think, is going to depend upon which way the war moves and what happens immediately after the referendum. And I think we'll know that in a few days' time. That's the real thing.
We are confused. What is happening there actually? Is he gaining ground vis-a-vis Russia? What does it mean that Putin is mobilizing reserves and the Europe sending wherewithal and arms to Zelensky? Does it mean that he has gained ground or he has got an upper hand at this stage of the war?
See, this is it's a good point because, the conflict is in a very delicately poised situation. Zelensky is leading the country from the front. He obviously enjoys very strong political support from the rest of Europe and from the United States and UK. They're also giving him very sophisticated weapons. and there's a huge package that has been approved by the US Congress to supply Ukraine with the latest weaponry to fight the Russians. So obviously he's getting a lot of support, including, as I mentioned, in the United Nations, in other diplomatic forums, so, and on the ground. So this is something which is actually raising his spirits. But at the same time, the reality is that the Ukrainian forces are under extreme stress and they are losing so many people. So much military infrastructure is getting destroyed. So it's difficult to say at any one point in time which side is quote unquote winning, because the country is so big. You have to talk about which theater of the war you are referring to. I mean, for example, east of the Dnieper River and west of the Dnieper River are different theaters. So at one point we saw Russian forces approaching Kiev, the capital. Today, most of the action is taking place in the eastern flank of Russia, going right down till Crimea and Odessa, or in Kharkiv, and all these places are very close to the Russian mainland. So there are, of course, the Russian forces suffered a setback and a defeat a few days ago around Kharkiv. And that has probably also been part of the reason why this referendum has been announced. So there are some sections where the Russians are moving in, some sections where they have withdrawn. But the fact is that the Ukrainians are getting these supplies from the West, and they are being deployed. So I think it's going to go on like this for some time. And I really do not, frankly, see a situation where you have an outright vanquished, someone who's completely defeated, or an outright victor. And that's, I think, the real problem here, because, if you have clear-cut victories and defeats, then it makes it easier. Yes. But, here the situation is so difficult that you may not have the situation, and that's the real problem.
Ambassador Saran, also in the Western media, there's a view that Putin did not give enough time or did not take its military into confidence. He was planning it for a long time. Only the frontline commanders were taken into confidence. So, and also he misjudged the popular sentiment in Ukraine. You have served in Russia. What is your take? What do you think? Is that the case?
President Putin has been in power basically for 22 years. The history of Russia actually is a history of a very strong authoritarian central leadership, starting from, say, Peter the Great. They really don't have a tradition of the kind of democracy, for example, we have in India. So decision making is actually very top heavy and centralized. And on most critical issues, it is taken by the Kremlin, not even by their ministries. So his decision is very much part of the old Russian tradition. About the Ukrainian mood, yes, there are different parts of Ukraine and there are different ethnicities, different religions. And so there are Ukrainians who do not like the Russians. And there is, of course, a big Russian community in the Donbas region. And so this ethnic fight between the Ukrainians and the Russians in Ukraine is something which actually lies also at the heart of the conflict. And so there is no uniform opinion within Ukraine about Russia. And the other thing, I've served there, every second Russian family has a Ukrainian connection. So they're like cousins, they're like almost blood brothers. And, cousins, brothers, sisters, the language, your food, your clothing, they're all so similar that it's very difficult sometimes to differentiate between a Russian and a Ukrainian. And that is actually also adding to the high level of emotion and strong sentiments on both sides.
Ambassador Saran, you would have seen or heard NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg say that President Putin's speech demonstrates that the war is not going according to his plan. And it is clear that he's made a miscalculation. The troops are not well prepared, or they lack command and control. And there is overwhelming support now we're seeing all over the world in favor of Ukraine. So, is it a fair assessment that is emerging in some quarters that the war is tilting in favor of Ukraine?
See, NATO is not directly a party to the conflict, but it is in some senses also a party to the conflict. So when either we hear a statement from the NATO or from the Russians, I think as Indians we really need to be able to slightly take a step back and make an objective assessment of the claims and counterclaims being made by both sides. And so in that spirit, I would say that to make clear-cut statements that Russia is losing or Ukraine is winning is not so simple, and I think it will be doing a disservice to the kind of analysis that India must make about the true nature of the conflict. So the information coming out of the battlefield and the ground is actually not very much. We are relying a lot on Western media reports about what is happening. Yes, there is, from the NATO point of view, the assessment that Russia is losing and that it is on the back foot. But that may not be actually the case. And the Russian military, there was this thing about Russia being able to, or the objective being to take Kiev in a few days, in 4 or 5 days, in February. We don't have any evidence whether that in fact was Russian strategy. It was something which was coming out from Western media reports. Now, it's been 7 months or 8 months. It is quite possible this may go on for another 7, 8 months, maybe a year. Who knows? And strategy making is a dynamic process. And also we have to also clear what we think are going to be or are the Russian objectives in the Ukraine. Is it to take over Ukraine? I don't think so. Is it to basically secure the Donbas region and the Russian population there? Possibly. But time will tell. And so I think we have to take such statements with a bit of a pinch of salt.
Yeah. Ambassador Saran, India's name is being mentioned in this entire episode for all the good reasons. Prime Minister Modi's advice to Putin was hailed by world leaders. Also, Ukraine is looking up to India to stop Russian invasion. Do you think in this situation, India can play a peacemaker in a limited way?
I would like to think so. I mean, when Prime Minister Modi said that to President Putin, it was picked up by all the Western leaders and the Western mass media. But, the problem is that you are dealing here with a conflict which involves the most powerful and the richest countries in the world. And, they're all in the Security Council. They're all nuclear armed. So for anyone to be able to mediate between such powerful forces is not easy. So what you can do, of course, is to be the moral voice of reason, of sanity, and appeal to the belligerents and to the parties that, look, you really need to set an example and, de-escalate. And which is what the Prime Minister's main message to President Putin was. And it is also to the Ukrainians, and it is also to the international community and, to the Europeans, to the Americans, that, look, please go back to the negotiating table, find a diplomatic solution. There are solutions available. It is known to everyone what a probable solution can look like. You basically need to ensure that the security interests of all sides are addressed, and that is the only way in which you can actually have sustainable peace. Because otherwise, this will go on forever. After all, in 1991, the Soviet Union disintegrated. You are now 30 years down that period. We all thought in 1991 a certain major phase of global history had been completed. But here what are you finding? That you're finding these unsettled borders between Russia and the successor states of the Soviet Union. And these are borders in which there are ethnicities and linguistic commonalities on both sides. So this issue is the reality, and it is not just with the Ukraine. There are other problems: Armenia, Azerbaijan, etc. So the solution for this has to be diplomatic, on the negotiating table, and I don't think there is any real solution possible on the battlefield. That's my opinion.
So India has inherited a set of problems which the rest of the world has also inherited because of this conflict. One of the very peculiar Indian problem is that we have 20,000 students who were studying in Ukraine, mostly engineering and medicine. They were studying medicine. Now they are back home, and all of them are kind of nowhere. They don't know what will be their future. Since you know that region well, you have served in Moscow. What could be the possible way out for these students? Will the neighboring countries accommodate them? What should we do about them?
No, it's obviously, Asha, it's very tragic because, you have these young men, young women, who spend a huge amount of money to go and study in Ukraine or in Crimea. And, they've actually had to be evacuated. And if you remember, the Prime Minister thanked President Putin for his help. Recently.
Yes.
And he also thanked Ukraine. So both countries actually helped us to bring all of them back. And, they belong to all the states of India. I mean, from Tamil Nadu to Kashmir, I mean, they're all there. Now, I don't think there is any immediate prospect for them to go back. Of course, we have still a huge number of students in Russia, studying in different parts of Russia. And I've traveled in Russia. It's a huge country. And we have Indian students from Vladivostok to St. Petersburg. And I've also actually traveled on the borders between Russia and Ukraine, where this battle is going on. And, we have students everywhere. So we have to address their needs in such a way that we look after them. I think for the immediate, frankly speaking, I think they just have to be reconciled to continue their education in India. A lot of them have actually also spent a lot of money learning the Russian language because that's the medium of education. So, but for the moment, I think they'll have to sit here and study here.
Ambassador Saran, India has arrived on the global stage and is having to do a tightrope walk. How do you see it balancing its ties with the United States on the one hand and Europe in the scenario that's playing out?
Good question. I mean, it's not easy, but I think Indian diplomacy has done really well since February, and the Indian position has actually been appreciated all around, including, I think, by the wider international community, because what India is saying, in a sense, reflects the attitudes and the sentiment of the vast majority of the countries, except for the parties and the belligerents or the parties to the conflict. Basically, what we are saying is, find a solution. And in the meanwhile, our relationships with the United States and Europe are going forward at a fairly fast pace in many, many areas. And it is quite clear that in the future, the relationship with the United States particularly, and with Europe also, are going to be very important for India's economic and technological security. That is quite clear because they possess, they are advanced countries, they are your export markets, they are the holders of technology. We need them. And they also, of course, need India, but we need them. On the other hand, with Russia, it's not just a question of the past or the emotions or some romanticization of the relationship with Russia. The fact is that Russia is not going anywhere. It is a huge country in the Eurasian continent. And today and tomorrow and in the foreseeable future, India will need to deal with Russia. And we need to have a friend in the Eurasian continent, because otherwise you have countries like China, you have countries like Pakistan, so the environment there is also challenging for us. So from a geostrategic point of view, we really need to be able to also maintain this relationship with Russia. And number two, Russia has a huge amount of natural resources. It's not just oil or gas or diamonds or mineral. It's got everything. They've got fresh water, they've got timber. There's nothing in the world which Russia does not have. So, and that's why the Prime Minister, when he went, one of the most recent initiatives we've taken with Russia is to expand our cooperation with the Russian Far East. And do you know that the Russian Far East is, just the Russian Far East is 2 times the size of India. So, it's huge territory and you cannot ignore it. And everyone is there, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Mongolians, and everyone is conscious of the resources and the expanse of the land. And in fact, India, and including the Prime Minister, have talked about how Indian labor, skilled, semi-skilled, can actually participate in the development of the Russian Far East, just as we've done in the Gulf. I mean, Indians have actually built the Gulf.
I think the diamond cutters, no?
The diamond, yes, I have visited some of the diamond factories. They are really very, very interesting. And most of them are from Gujarat
Surat.
and Surat. And they're so skilled. So they've set up a small training school where they train Russians how to polish diamonds. And it's not easy because you need really nimble fingers. And it's a skill which, goes on from generation to generation. It's not a piece of paper you can study. So you've set up these diamond training schools, you've set up these polishing centers, and so that's contributing to Russian export, also jobs for Indians. So all this is happening there. And apart from that, of course, we have a lot of investments in energy, $15 billion of Indian investments in the oil and gas sector, in the Far East, in Siberia, and in Yamal, and in Sakhalin. These are the areas where actually you have huge deposits.
Ambassador Saran, Putin has sent a terrifying message by indicating possible use of nuclear weapons. The US and Europe are quiet, but they're supplying weapons and other support to Ukraine. Where is the world headed to?
Well, it's very disturbing the way we are moving forward. And the reason for it is that, as I mentioned to you, this is a conflict taking place between nuclear powers, between countries which possess the most mighty militaries in the world. How do we, as the rest of the world, contribute to the reduction of tensions? Obviously, any use of nuclear weapons is going to be a disaster. That is quite clear. Even the threat of use of nuclear weapons is an extremely disturbing aspect. And we don't want to, and we don't like to listen to such talk. I mean, if you remember, just maybe a year or two ago, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the former Prime Imran Khan, was talking about the fact that Pakistan has nuclear weapons. So, these are not things which make you feel good about the situation in the world. So I agree with you. We have to bring a halt to further escalation.
Normally, when we see Mr. Putin on television screens or anywhere, he looks very calm, in total control of the situation. But I'm sure, the Russia also has to pay a price for what it is doing. So has the pressure already, the economic pressure, has it started telling upon the Russian society, or everything is calm and quiet there? There are a lot of everything to withstand all these pressures. What is your take, sir?
Yeah, no, I've spoken to quite a few people who visited Russia in the last 6 months to different parts. They visited Moscow, St. Petersburg, maybe a couple of other cities. So what they tell me is that life is fairly normal. The only thing they see is that in their shopping malls, etc., some of the multinational companies and the big brands, they've shut shop. But if you look at the availability in the shops, the restaurants, the day-to-day life, the theatre, all that is going on. So it doesn't look as if Russia is about to shut down as an economy. But you know what? I think the sanctions will have an impact because they're quite serious. And they are meant essentially to cut Russia off from the international financial and trading system. So that may not have an impact today. But I think in the next few years, there will be an impact on how much Russia can trade and invest with the rest of the countries. But by the way, there are no sanctions on oil and energy. That's why we have been importing oil from Russia. So I think so. Therefore, for the present, the impact is minimal. But I think in the course of the next 2, 3, 4 years and maybe more, there will be some impact. But it doesn't mean that we are going to see the collapse of Russia. You didn't even see the collapse of Iran. I'm sorry. Yes. Or which was also under sanctions.
Yes.
I mean, you ask people who are visiting Tehran today, they're saying it's a thriving economy. Of course, there are other kinds of pressures, collapse of the value of the currency, etc. But, everything is available.
So, Ambassador Saran, for Russia, is economy the only concern for Putin to keep his flock together, or do you think there's internal, the politics and variant views on the mobilization, escalating the war to a full-fledged war?
Yeah, I don't think anyone likes to join a war effort. And the most of the people today in Russia, the youth, they were all born after 2000. And they're all youngsters, 20-year-olds. But as I said, Russia has this military tradition, which they have grown up with, these young men and women, their fathers and mothers and all, they've been part of the war effort. But yes, I really do think there's probably going to be very little enthusiasm to join the war effort. But what he's invoking is Russian pride and the fact that you're going to fight for your motherland. And, this is Russian pride at stake. So he's actually trying to raise the levels of patriotism to mobilize the enthusiasm. But yes, it's difficult. It was not going to be easy. But, Russian institutions are there. And if they say that this has to be done, it will be done.
Right.
Ambassador Saran, how important is Russia for India in the current world order? Can you take us through how India-Russia ties have evolved, let's say, in the last 20 years?
Yeah. I think President Putin, when he came to power in 2000, he was the one who actually restored the India-Russia relationship. And that's when we had the announcement of the strategic partnership with Russia. And in these 22 years, leaders have been meeting extremely frequently, maybe every year at least. So the relationship has progressed in defense, in space, in technology, in trade, in economy, in agriculture recently, as I mentioned, in the Far East. And of course, 60% of our military supplies now are from Russia. So the relationship has actually moved a lot. In addition, if you look at the geography of Russia, it also means that Russia can play an important role for India in our presence in the Eurasian continent. And which is why Russia, again, assumes importance. Remember, we don't have a common border with Russia. We have no bilateral dispute with Russia. It's not like China where we have serious problems. So in that sense, and then, of course, we have lots of tourist travel, which is growing, and soft power exchanges with Russia. They love I was shocked the amount they love of Indian Bollywood, Indian culture,
music, yes.
Indian music, Indian film actors, Indian dance, yoga. I saw it through the length and breadth of the country, and it comes naturally to them. So it's quite remarkable.
And what about food?
They love Indian food. They love Indian food. They love the kebab. And there are more and more Indian restaurants mushrooming there, but they can't handle the spices.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you one question, Ambassador. This Ukraine war, sometimes it could be my fantasy or others' fantasy. It could change the world order, with India, China, and Russia being on one side and America being on the other side, leading the West, and still not being anywhere. They didn't do anything in Ukraine, when Moscow attacked it. So could it be possibly beginning of a new world order in the world order? What is your take?
I wouldn't go that far. I would only say that this is a defining moment for European security. How Europe lives with Russia is what is going to be the final kind of a determinant or outcome of how the Ukrainian crisis unfolds. It's been going on since 2014, and it's now reached this stage. So the European security architecture, I think, is one thing which is going to be critically dependent on how this is handled. Insofar as the global world order is concerned, I think we just have to be very clear in the midst of all this complexity that, for us as India, the primary challenge is the rise of China. And we should not, miss the woods for the trees. I mean, that really is the primary strategic challenge which we must keep our focus on. And in that context, we should decide how we have to pursue our relationship with the United States, in the Indo-Pacific, with the European Union, and with Russia.
Ambassador Saran, India has emerged as an important player in the recently concluded SCO summit. What, according to you, are the takeaways from this summit?
India became a member of the SCO in 2016. We attended the summit in 2017 as a full member. It's now been 4 years. And Prime Minister was there last month for the summit in Samarkand. And it's important for India to be present in the SCO because everyone is there. We have our friends there, we have our adversaries there. Iran has just joined. Turkey, the president of Turkey was there in Samarkand. So there is a whole, class of countries which are members of the SCO, and India's presence is absolutely essential. Next year, we will ourselves be hosting the SCO summit. And so the ability for India to go there and express its views on terrorism, on extremism, on transit through Afghanistan or through Pakistan, on connectivity, through the use of the North-South transport corridor, through Chabahar port, all these are real issues. And the Central Asians really want India to be there because we are invited, and there is a demand for more Indian involvement in that region, and we must be able to respond to that demand.
Right.
So, dear listeners, we finished this discussion. It's not easy to discuss such a complicated issue, but we tried to make some sense out of it. The net result is that everyone must go back to the negotiating table, find diplomatic solutions. War is not the solution and it's not the way forward. And as India, our voice is in favor of diplomacy, negotiation, and peaceful settlement of disputes. So, till we meet again, thank you so much, and we will see you with yet another issue next time around. Thank you and namaskar.